Hi, I'm Bess.
And I'm Raphael.
And we are Two Peas in the Kitchen.
In today's video, we're going to show you how to make these delicious cranberry orange scones.
As always, we will share time-saving tips and tricks to help home cooks make easy, elegant eats.
If this sounds like exactly what you need, hit that subscribe button and join us in the fun. Okay, so just a quick overview on the ingredients that we're going to use, and then we'll show you how to make these delicious scones, along with, as always, our easy peasy tips to help you along the process. So we're going to use an all-purpose flour. We always like using organic flour, cane sugar, sea salt. We're going to use some delicious orange zest, vanilla extract, cold butter, buttermilk, cranberries, and baking powder and baking soda. And then at the end, we're going to add this decorative and tasty large crystals of sugar on top.
Okay, before we get started mixing up all the ingredients for our delicious orange cranberry scones, take a moment and preheat your oven to 400 degrees.
First thing we're going to do is zest this orange. And the recipe calls for the zest of one orange. It's approximately 2 tablespoons or so. You don't have to stress about that. I'm just going to zest the entire orange. Now, there is one important thing that you need to know when you zest any citrus fruits. So you want to stay fairly superficial. You don't want to really dig into the white pith that's below the rind. Otherwise, it becomes too bitter. So I'm going to use this. We love using this microplane to zest the oranges. This is a wonderful tool, and I'm including a link to this in our blog post in the description of this video so that you can reference it. These are wonderful. We use them all the time. So what I'm going to do simply is hold the microplane in my left hand. I'm right-handed, and I'm going to take my orange and hold it over a bowl. And you don't want to really dig in. Just do it very lightly. I start at the top, kind of like that. And you can see you don't want to really go any deeper than that. Otherwise, your zest is going to be very bitter. You don't want to go into that white pith. Okay, and I already smell the deliciousness of the zest. So I'm just going to kind of work my way around the perimeter of the orange, just like this. And again, just think of light strokes like this, and I just kind of flick my wrist a little bit until you've done the entire orange. And that's about it. We're done. That's about approximately 2 tablespoons or so.
Okay, so now we're ready to get all of our dry ingredients into the bowl that we're going to use to mix all of the ingredients for our scones. The first thing that we have for this recipe is we have 2 cups of all-purpose flour, and I've also weighed this flour. Raphael and I have talked about in previous videos the importance of measuring the flour by spooning it into your cup, leveling it off, and then pouring it into your recipe. You don't ever want to dig your whole measuring cup into the flour because it makes the flour much denser than it really should be for your recipe. So I've weighed this flour, and it's also approximately 275 grams when weighed. You could look at our country bread recipe if you want to know a little bit more about why we weigh our flour in addition to measuring it. So there we have our all-purpose flour. We also have 1/3 of a cup of sugar. We have 1 1/4 teaspoons of baking powder. It's very important, oops, a little bit left in there. It's very important that you check the expiration date of your baking powder. Expired baking powder is not going to give any of your baked goods the rise that you want them to have. Additionally, we have here 1/4 of a teaspoon of baking soda, and we also have 1/4 of a teaspoon of salt. So you're just going to take a fork and incorporate all of your dry ingredients together like that until we move on to the next part of our scone recipe.
Okay, next we're going to grate our butter. So our easy peasy tip number 1 for this recipe is to stick your stick of butter, 1 stick of butter you'll need for this recipe, into the freezer for 10 minutes. That's all it takes. I'll explain why we want to use cold butter, why it's important to use cold butter shortly in about a minute. So I'm going to take this. This has been in the freezer already, so it's nice and cold. I'm just going to take the wrapper off, and I'm just going to use one of these graters, and this one has a couple different sizes. I'm going to use the large side of the cheese grater, and what I like to do is I unwrap the stick of butter, and I like to hold it so I'm not melting it with my hands. Hold it like this, and then simply grate it, and it goes very quickly. Just be careful when you get down low so that you don't grate your hands. To the very end. And then we're going to incorporate this into our flour mixture that Bess just showed you how to make. So let's see here. It almost looks like cheese, doesn't it? It's nice and cold. Okay, so now I'm going to take our grated butter and I'm going to incorporate it into our flour mixture. So I'm just breaking it up here. It did clump up a tiny bit, so I'm just going to add it right to our flour mixture. Get all of it out that you can, and mix it in gently with a big fork. So why do we use cold butter? The reason we use cold butter is because you want the little chunks of butter to be in your dough and not incorporated into the flour or the dry ingredients. Because the chunks of butter are actually going to, as your scones bake in the oven, they're going to release water or steam and then make your scones nice and fluffy. We don't want our scones to be like bricks. So that's why we use cold butter. So you don't want to go too crazy incorporating it. Just give it a nice mix. You may want to break up, if you see any big clumps, break it up with the fork and you're good to go. And also another reason that we like grating the cold butter this way is because you don't have to use a pastry cutter or knives or your fingers, because it's just much easier this way. It's very, very simple. And next we're going to add our orange zest. I'm just going to scrape all this out. It smells absolutely delicious. And I'm just going to give it a nice quick mix till it's fully incorporated. And that's it for this step.
Okay, so here we have the dry ingredients with the butter and the orange zest incorporated, and I am seriously telling you, it smells amazing. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to incorporate a cup of roughly chopped dried cranberries. One thing that's really important through these next two steps with our scones is you do not want to overwork scone dough. The same is actually true of biscuits, which we'll be talking about in a later video that we're going to do about biscuits, but we really want to preserve the integrity of those grated pieces of cold butter that are in the dough that Rafi was explaining. So while you do need to mix everything, you just want to be careful not to overwork it. You have to be a little bit gentle with that precious scone dough. So I like to just make a little hole right in the middle of the scone dough like that. And here we have 3/4 of a cup of buttermilk, which I have added the 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract right into the buttermilk. So we're going to pour that right into the middle. Make sure we get all of that delicious buttermilk there. And here's where you really got to be gentle with the dough. So I just kind of work it from the sides. And with scone dough, it's not like a cake batter where you're really looking for something smooth and creamy. You're really just trying to create a kind of ragged dough mass, while being very careful not to overwork those chunks of butter. So I just try to do it kind of from the bottoms to get all that extra dry ingredients worked in there. So this part of the recipe, you can do this gently with your KitchenAid mixer or whatever countertop mixer that you like to use. If you're going to use a mixer to do it and not do it by hand, use your paddle attachment and do it on the lowest speed and watch it really carefully, because we're really just going for basic incorporation of the ingredients. And it does take a little longer to do it by hand only because you need to be gentle with it. So sometimes when I get to the very end here, what I do is I take my hands, which I've just washed, my clean hands, and I just gently incorporate the last bit of the dry ingredients gently with my hands. I think if you're not going to use a mixer at the very end, it's the easiest way to do it when we're trying to be careful.
Okay, now it's time to form our dough and then cut it into our scones. So I have a cutting board here. I'm going to lightly flour it. You don't want it, it's not necessary to add too much, just a little bit, so that your dough doesn't stick. Okay, I'm going to grab our dough ball, and I'm just going to simply press it with my hands. There's no need to use a rolling pin or anything like that. I'm going to press it down into about a square or a rectangle, and we want it approximately 1.25 inches to 1.5 inches thick. And I'm going to use this pastry cutter, and I really like this pastry cutter. This is from Sur La Table. As you can see, there's measurements. There's a ruler on both sides, so you can easily tell the thickness. So I'm going to use this to gauge the thickness of the dough. So let's go ahead, and it's actually not sticky at all, which is great. So I'm just going to simply press it down. Again, you don't want to overwork the dough. I'm going to do it into a rectangle. And let's see, it's about 1 inch or so. So I'm just going to make it a little bit thicker here. That's about 1.25 inches. So that's pretty good. Okay, so now we have the proper thickness, and I'm just going to take the pastry cutter and I'm going to cut it right in half, one direction. And then each half I'm going to cut in half again. And then each of the quarters I'm going to cut in half. So we're going to end up, in this particular case, with 8 scones. And there we have our 8 scones. So if you like them thinner, you could always make them a little bit thinner, but then they're going to cook a little bit quicker. So just be careful about that. We like to make ours about 1.25 inches to 1.5 inches at the most thick. These are more like 1.25 inches when I measure them out.
So we have our scones. They're perfectly cut by Raphael here, and we're going to take some unbleached parchment paper. Please do not use bleached parchment paper on these beautiful scones, and we're going to put that right onto our cookie sheet. And we're going to just separate these a little bit here. So before we put these onto the cookie sheet, we're going to take, I misshaped a couple of them here, just a little bit. This is just buttermilk, the same buttermilk we used in the recipe. And we're just going to brush a little bit of that buttermilk right on top of each of our scones. A little, and then this is one of our favorite ingredients in all of our baked goods. This is our large crystal sugar, and it really adds a beautiful kind of sparkling top to these scones. So we just are very generous in how we use this, and that buttermilk that I just painted on will kind of soak right into the dough, and it will leave a little bit of a sparkling, sweet topping to these scones. And then I'm going to put these on a cookie sheet. One of the things that we want to talk about is our easy peasy tip number 2 about these scones. If you would prefer to not make the scones the day that you've made the batter, what you can do is you can take the scone dough after it's cut before you put the buttermilk and the crystal sugar on top, And you can put it right onto a cookie sheet with parchment paper like I'm doing right now. And you take that and you stick it in your freezer for about a half an hour to 45 minutes, up to an hour, until the scone dough gets hard, flash frozen. And then you can pop the uncooked scones that are now hard and flash frozen right into a large baggie and put them back in the freezer. I get all the air out of the baggie. You can also wrap them in parchment or foil, but it's really easy to just stick them in a baggie. And we just label those with the date we made them, and you can keep them in your freezer for up to 3 months. When you want to bake them out of the freezer, it is so easy, and it's so nice to have warm scones when you have company, or if you're just having a busy morning and you want a special treat. You can take the scones right out of the freezer. You can put them right onto a cookie sheet in your parchment. Let them sit at room temperature for about 10 minutes, and then you continue on with the step where you're going to brush the buttermilk on them and add your large crystal sugar. And then they just go right into the oven, continuing with the recipe like we're going to do right now. They're actually delicious that way. It is a really super easy peasy tip to use with any scone or even biscuit dough. We'll talk about that when we do our biscuit videos, but we really love that tip. And now we're done with this step and we're ready to bake our scones.
Okay, so now we're just going to place our cookie sheet in the oven, in a preheated oven, 400 degrees. It should be nice and hot, right on the middle rack. We're going to leave them in there for about 20 minutes until the scones are nice and golden brown on top and nice and golden brown on the bottom as well. Okay, so these stayed in our oven for exactly 20 minutes. And what you want to look for is a nice browning, just a little bit of browning on top. You don't need that much. But then you also don't want them to burn at the bottom. So these are actually nice and brown on the bottom, but they're not burned. That's exactly what you want. So at this point, in order to let them cool, I'm just going to place them right on this wire rack so that they can get to room temperature. And then we're going to taste them. And the sugar on top is beautiful. It adds a little bit of crunch, a little bit of sweetness. And these are perfect for breakfast in the morning or anytime you want something sweet. And we really recommend keeping frozen scones in your freezer at all times because these are so delicious. Okay, this is always our favorite part, so let's taste one of these scones. You want to pick one?
Are we going to each taste our own, or are we going to split one?
We can split one for now.
Okay, that sounds good. I was getting a little greedy with the scones. Oh, they smell so amazing.
Oh my gosh.
Wow, look
the
at
texture.
Look at how beautiful those scones
Oh my God.
are. Oh my gosh, they smell so good. Oh my God. They're so good.
No way.
They're so good. So, just like we talked about, talk with my mouth full here, you can really understand when you taste these the difference that it makes to use that cold butter. These are so easy to make and they're so delicious. And in addition to the fact that we've told you about how you can store the uncooked scones, you can also take these scones and once they cool, you need to let them cool all the way, you can plop them right into a baggie or into a container and you can put them in your freezer cooked. And they can stay there for up to 3 months. And when you're ready to eat them, you can just take them out, put them back on your wire rack, let them come to room temperature and enjoy them.
Although they're best frozen raw, and then you cook them as you needed.
Because they're so delicious when they're warm like
They don't actually keep terribly long, so if you want to keep them right after you bake them, let them cool completely first to room temperature, and then put them in an airtight container, a Tupperware container or something like that, airtight for up to 2 days. After that, you won't have the same texture. They're really best fresh or eaten within a day or two.
And that's why our easy peasy tip with scone dough is just to flash freeze the ones that you don't need and bake them as needed.
Are we going to eat more? I want more.
I think we're going to eat more. We hope that you enjoy these as much as we do. We love this recipe. They're delicious. Cheers.
Cheers. We hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you've tried making these cranberry orange scones, make sure you leave us a comment down below to let us know what you think. The link to the blog post is in the description below for reference.
And also, please join our pod and please subscribe to our channel. And also, join us on all the rest of our cooking adventures. We look forward to seeing you next time.
Bye for now.
Bye.